So I'm Writing a Novel is the show where you join me, Oliver Brackenbury, on the journey of writing my next novel, from first ideas all the way to publication and promotion. In this one-man reality show, I'll share with you my ever-evolving thoughts and feelings on how I write, being a writer, and everything that entails at each stage of the process. I'll also interview special guests involved in writing and publishing. If you're the kind of person who likes to learn how things are made and get to know the people making them, then this is the show for you. I'd like to say a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters who make this show possible. Patrons receive perks like my face mysteriously appearing slowly but surely on the back of their necks. And if you're not one already, you can check out all the other perks and exclusive content over at patreon.com/soimwritinganovel. As someone who has just about dipped his toes into the world of independent publishing by putting out New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine, I am increasingly curious to learn more about independent publishing. And I have heard very lovely things about Queen of Swords Press from all kinds of people I trust, including some past guests of the show. So I thought it might be interesting to learn more about both them and being an independent press in general by having award-winning author and editor Catherine Lundoff, the Queen of Swords, on the show. By the by, Queen of Swords is an independent small press based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and specializes in swashbuckling tales of daring do, bold new adventures in time and space, mysterious stories of the occult and arcane, and fantastical tales of people and lands far and near. Now, to hear a little bit more than what you can just get by reading off the website, by talking with Catherine. And here we are with Catherine. Hello, Catherine.
Hi there. How are you?
Doing well on a sleepy Sunday in Toronto. I hope you're doing okay down in, I want to say Minnesota?
Yeah, I'm in Minneapolis. So.
Oh, Minneapolis, sorry. American cities and names. I mean, who can keep track of them? It's not like we see you in our TV and film every day of our lives in Canada. Or I should prepare for an interview. Who knows? All right, well, why don't we start in the shallow end and work our way deeper? Queen of Swords is a genre publisher, and you must love what you publish to put in the great deal of time and effort required to run an indie press. So, as part of getting to know you here, would you mind sharing with us, where did your love of genre writing begin, and what were some key texts for you while growing up?
Oh, let's see. So I started out actually with historical fiction. So I read a lot of historical fiction, as a preteen, as a teenager. Sir Walter Scott, Anthony Hope, Alexander Dumas, all that fun stuff. All of which are a lot of fun. And, I kind of wanted to see more women. I wanted to see more women doing things. And they're not particularly great books for active women's roles, except, Milady running around killing people and so forth. but apart from that. So I wanted to see more of that. And as I got a little older, I wandered into the science fiction and fantasy section of the library and started exploring. And so I think probably I can remember discovering Ursula Le Guin, and that would have been in probably the mid-70s. So it would have been right around the time that the first Earthsea books were coming out, and they were still marketing it as kids' literature because, by a woman, it's fantasy, must be kids' literature. So I think a lot of it kind of went, over the head. I've reread them since, but I think I'd have to really do a deep dive because I think there's a lot of stuff that just kind of zipped on.
The third one I always think of is like, this was marketed for kids, huh? It just grapples with deep issues of mortality. I mean, I think, kids are smarter than we give them credit for. Should totally be allowed to read that stuff. But just I could see, that'd be some of that going over the head of like a 7-10-year-old, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that it's not that it isn't good. It's just that there's some things, there's some nuances. There's a lot of stuff that just kind of gallops past you because you don't have the same kind of attention to detail, life experience, all of that stuff that makes it really come to life.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with Le Guin and then kind of went on from there and read all the classic stuff at the time. My mother was very into Conan, so I got to read a lot of Robert Howard and Michael Moorcock for some reason. I don't know why the two, but for some reason those were two that she really enjoyed.
Nice.
So we had a lot of those those books laying around the house. So I read a lot of that. So just kind of went from there.
Okay. And what would be the origin story for Queen of Swords Press? How did it come about?
Well, I have a background as a bookseller. So I was actually a bookseller before I was a writer. And I started writing fiction around the point that I closed up my bookstore because it was the 90s and I ran out of money, as with many people who started bookstores back then, wildly underfinanced. And, the market for a queer-friendly feminist book, little tiny bookstore is not great. So I started, I did what one does, and I got into law school. And during the course of a concentrated semester where they packed into a much shorter time frame the stuff that would have normally been spread out over a semester, I discovered that misery made me telekinetic. And I'd like walk into the kitchen and dishes would slide off the countertop and stuff. So in the course of this, my partner, then wife, now wife, said to me, "Hey, why don't you try writing a book?" And she said it was like watching all the lights go on a runway. So I started writing, and I wrote a lot of short fiction. I was traditionally published by another small press for a number of years. We came to a parting of the ways after about 5 books in 5 years, and I was casting about for things to do, and I got offered a 3-book deal by what was at that point a larger romance publisher. And the contract looked kind of hinky, so I had a local attorney take a look at it. And I did not know this woman. This was just somebody I got off a list. I paid a fee to. Right. And she called me up at work and left a message on my work voicemail that said, "No, honey, no, don't sign this." Which turned out to be prophetic. Among other things, the contract had clauses that were so restrictive. The level of NDA in them was such that you couldn't say anything good about working with them either. It wasn't just you couldn't say anything bad. You couldn't say anything at all.
Imagine going after someone for that. It was a great experience. Get her.
So I went back, tried to negotiate, got shot down, and said, walked away from it. And at the time that was difficult. Subsequently, about 8 months later, they blew up really spectacularly, went bankrupt. There were lawsuits. There were all kinds of things going on. So I felt like the $200 or whatever I paid that attorney was totally worth it. So this was the opportunity to do a bit of soul searching, figure out where my career was going at that point. And I thought, I haven't done publishing yet. I've done writing. I've done editing. I've done book selling, but I haven't done publishing. And as I said to friends of mine at the time, and I cannot possibly be more dysfunctional than some of the people I've been working with. So with that key piece of information and a goal, I started doing, I was thinking, I started thinking about names. I took classes from the Small Business Administration. I took classes on writing ad copy, evaluating cover art, all of that kind of good stuff. Started the ball rolling on things, looking at names. And the Queen of Swords is a tarot card, and it's my tarot card. It's the tarot card I look at and go, that's my signifier. That's who I am.
Oh, okay.
The best interpretation of the Queen of Swords card that I have seen, or the one that spoke loudest to me, was a woman who is not to be trifled with. And I'm like, yeah.
Well, she's got those swords.
Yeah. So I spent a couple of years prepping for it, launched in 2017, started with my backlist because I didn't want to practice on other people. That seemed unfair.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the first 4 books are my backlist, and then by 2018, I had started publishing other authors, and we went from there.
Would you mind expanding on what those 2 years of prep were? Because I think a lot of people probably just go, "I'm going to do it," and they get a web domain, and within 3 or 4 weeks, something's happening. But did those 2 years entail stuff like the classes you were mentioning, like the small business stuff, or?
I spent 2 years. I mean, it was basically so I'd already had the bookstore. I had already experienced the "Hey kids, grandpa's got a barn. Let's just put on a show" style of starting a business. It lasted about 2 years. By the time it ended, I had walking pneumonia. Yeah.
Listener, I just pulled a face. Anyway, go on.
I was able to scrape together the cash to pay back the people who loaned me money to start it. This was pre-crowdfunding. Crowdfunding was not so much a thing back then, but it was a lot. That was pretty painful. So when I looked at starting the press, I wanted to give it a better chance of success. So we have here in the Twin Cities an arm of the Small Business Administration, which is a federal program. The local subset of it is a nonprofit called Women Venture that does trainings with women just to want to start small businesses. So I did some trainings with them, and it was stuff like how to write a business plan, how to set up a basic budget, things to know before you get started. So I went through, I hired an attorney to set up an LLC. I got a website set up. I bought domains. I did some research on getting a logo done. I hired an artist to do the logo. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. And then the local literary center at the time was doing a lot of classes and things like how to write ad copy and how to look at cover art and evaluate what looks good on the book. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff. And then I was also networking around trying to figure out cover artists whose work I liked. And that was basically a lot of what happened prior to launching the press. And then probably that whole first year was figuring out platforms and pricing and outreach and all of that stuff.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was going to ask you later about like what formal and informal education most helped out with this, and I feel like we're here now, so let's cover that. Cheers. Okay, so if someone's just browsing like indie pubs in general and they see yours, what would you say sets Queen of Swords Press apart from the crowd?
I think we do really interesting books that aren't necessarily getting published elsewhere. So I think we do focus on LGBTQ protagonists. All of our books have at least one. So that's one aspect of it. I have fairly eclectic reading tastes, and I'm the one who does most of our sales. So as a result, we do a little bit of everything, and I think that'll continue to be the case going forward. I like things that are mostly fun. So we've got things like Alex Axe's steampunk stories, which are just, rollicking, wild adventures set in an alternate vision of the American West. We've got things like A.J. Fitzwater's The Voyages of Sinrak the Dapper, which is a mini collection of stories about a dapper lesbian capybara pirate captain. We went through like a period where there was a lot of pirate stuff. So I spent a jolly day at an event at a brewery here in town in which I was wedged in between a couple of authors, and one of them had this doorstop series of pirate fantasies that he'd written. And he had this very sort of deep, very slow voice. And every time somebody went by, he would go up to them, he would reach out to them. When approached, just reach out and say, "Hi, do you like pirates?" So after about 4 hours of that,
Boy, I mean that's marketing.
in order to get this gentleman's voice out of my head, I announced we were going to do a pirate anthology. So we did a pirate anthology, and it turned out to be just wildly, wildly eclectic. When I went into it, I had a much more set vision of what it was going to turn out to be. And we ended up with Scourge of the Seas of Time and Space. It's historical, science fiction, and fantasy stories about pirates. And we got submissions by authors from 14 different countries. And one local, and just like wild variety. I mean, everything from like pirates in the canals of post-apocalyptic, post-climate change New York City to a story about Andromache, Hector's widow, turning pirate after the Trojan Wars. And in the middle of this, we got this fabulous story about a dapper lesbian capybara pirate. And I know, AJ, I've been to New Zealand. I've been to the national convention there and so forth. So I looked at it and I said, well, guess we're going with furries too. So I reached out to AJ and said, could there be more of these? I know there's at least one other story, but would you want to do a collection? And AJ said, why, yes. And so we went forward from there. So that book came out in 2020, which was just a train wreck of a year in so many ways. But anyway, putting that aside for the moment.
What are you talking about? I don't watch the news, sorry.
I mentioned I'm in Minneapolis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we live 4 blocks from George Floyd Square, and things were on fire a lot that year. It was very, very intense. So
Dear. Plus a little thing called the pandemic, right? So yeah, there's a lot going on.
Well, we had lockdown. We had kind of a healthy chunk of like everything that year. It was intense. It was very intense.
But speaking more to the positive side, you mentioned you guys have also published Solar Punk, which is an inherently optimistic look at the future.
We've done some solar punk. We just released urban fantasy. We've got a really fabulous fairy tale retelling. Heather Rose Jones is an author who does a lot of podcasting and blogging about depictions of queer women throughout history. And she has her own fantasy series with another publisher. But she wrote this terrific novella that's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast with an aromantic beauty,
Huh.
which really just unpacks so many levels of that story in some really interesting ways. So that's The Language of Roses that came out last year. We also released Michael Merriam's Last Car to Anun Station, which is set in Minneapolis circa about 2007. I occasionally refer to it as the most Minneapolis urban fantasy since Emma Bull's War for the Oaks. Because it is. It's just, it's that same sort of love song to a specific place and time.
Mhm.
We just put out a new edition of Melissa Scott and Amy Griswold's Death by Silver, which is gay gas lamp Edwardian murder mysteries. It's volume 1. Volume 2 will be out in December. We do my menopausal werewolf series as well. I have a series of novels about menopausal werewolves, which are about coming out at midlife and finding community and werewolves.
Well, that makes sense because I'm so much more. Maybe it's just the Canadian thing. We have a still popular 20 years later werewolf horror film about where the metaphor is about coming into puberty as a girl and the blood and all that. I've never thought about the other end of menopause. Geez, I like that.
Oddly enough, Ginger Snaps did actually partially inspire it.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah.
Because
Cool. Okay.
Ginger Snaps came out. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say Ginger Snaps came out around the same time that Susie McKee Charnas, who's a prominent fantasy author who just passed away recently, Susie had written a story called Boobs, which was also about a teenage girl becoming a werewolf at puberty. And I kind of looked at those, and somebody had invited me to write for an anthology of werewolf stories, and I'm like, well, I want to do something different. So I did something different. I ran across there's a like a I don't know WebMD or something like that, and it was one of those sites that had a description of the symptoms of menopause, and it was mood swings, longer teeth because your gums recede. It
Oh,
went on in that unexpected hair growth, and I'm like, you know what that sounds like.
like vulnerability to silver. What? Yeah.
So yeah, and thus the series was launched. So.
Okay, well, I mean, it sounds like Queen of Swords Press could not be accused of lack of variety. That's for sure. It sounds
No.
like you guys are, and it sounds like also it would be fair to say that you guys do have a focal point as well. Publishing queer woman-forward literature. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, so this is all sorts of wonderful stuff, and you're actually in the middle of promotion right now, of course, talking with me. But just broadly speaking, how do you approach the challenge of promotion? Also, could you just tell me what's going to finally replace Twitter? Because, oh my God, everybody I speak to, everyone I speak to, especially people who do crowdfunding campaigns, they're like, I got to figure it out. I got to figure it out because it's breaking more with every week.
Yeah.
But nothing has really replaced it yet either. It's still the best place online, I find, for networking and for magnifying your reach, despite the all of it.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I wish I had a definite answer for you. So far, I've primarily switched over to Mastodon out in Wandering Shop, which is the science fiction and fantasy instance. I've dabbled my toes in Spoutable, but I don't really like it. I mean, the setup is fine. It's just more about conversations on Spoutable, at least in the areas that I've been in, seem to focus a lot on ranting. And
yeah. Not who needs that?
People aren't actually having conversations. I find people have more conversations on Mastodon, but it's not great for promoting work because it's hard to thread things and it's hard to find things and all the stuff that goes in there. What I've seen about Blue Sky doesn't seem very appealing yet. So unless they come up with something different, I mean, at this point, I think that as publishers, as writers, we have to start thinking about the fact that our audience is getting more visual about books and reading. And that's part of why TikTok is a bigger thing.
Yeah.
So we have dutifully gone out to TikTok. We are on TikTok. We do Instagram. We do, what else do we do? What don't we do? We don't do Tumblr just because I didn't have time.
Well, and Tumblr seems to be kind of to the side now. I think
Yeah.
when they did their whole "No More Nudity, Thanks" routine, that really murdered their audience, and they haven't been able to claw it back. I don't hear anyone say they're excited about Tumblr these days. Yeah, whereas like Book Talk and BookTube were maybe bigger deals.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of since recording, I'm kind of rooting for Hive because it's like Twitter plus Instagram, and I think okay, we got the visual, and we got the threads and the magnification for retweets and stuff. But they just haven't got a desktop client yet. And I
Oh,
find I use these apps mostly on the computer because that's where I mostly am doing work or whatever. And it's easier just to flick over to it and easier and more comfortable to do certain things in terms of uploading stuff. But, it's still anybody's game at this point. We'll
yeah.
see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly room for it to go a whole bunch of different directions. But yeah, I'm expecting Twitter to finally finish going poof. And
It's getting like when a mall hasn't quite died, but you know it's coming. It's
yes,
coming.
yes,
It's getting that feeling,
yeah,
and yeah, and then Blue Sky, like I at first was very optimistic because a lot of people I trust were going and trying it out, and it is kind of fun in a way to pretend that it's Twitter before all the garbage, but moderation and a whole bunch of other things, right, are sort of questionable,
yeah.
and it's still invite only right now, so we'll see what happens. But sorry, I got too specific just because yeah, I don't know anybody I'm speaking to right now as an editor of my own publication. I don't know anyone who's trying to promote something in the world of books and publishing right now who isn't kind of going, oh, Jesus, and staring at Twitter. So I thought I'd get your 10 cents on that specific issue. But more broadly, what is your approach to promotion?
Well, I mean, we're financed through a combination of book sales and our Patreon, which is a deliberate choice on my part. I didn't, want to be continually pumping money into it to keep this afloat because that's an expensive hobby and we don't want those. So we're, we haven't gone the route of crowdsourcing books. That I could see doing that for one or two titles. I can't see doing that all the time for every single book. And I know there are publishers who do that and they make it work for them, and that's great. But that's not something I want to do. So for us, I've gone with the model of continuous motion, sort of like a shark. So, we're always doing book tables. And I mean, this week let's see, I was on the local radio station. We have a local radio station with it's volunteer run, and they have a show that's specifically around writing. So I was just a guest on that. So been doing that. In the last couple of weeks, we've had book tables at things. We all do a lot of teaching. Jenny
Or
Golovoy
for
is one of.
anybody who's not familiar, do you mind just quickly explaining what a book table is?
Oh, sure. So, book table is when you have a table at an event. A couple of weeks ago, the Women's Center for one of the local universities had a bunch of us in, and we all had tables, and people could go around and ask about the books and ask what we were doing and buy things if they wanted to. So, we do a lot of those. We do a lot of conventions. We do mostly science fiction and fantasy ones, but we also do literary festivals. We do book fairs. We'll do Pagan Pride in the fall. We do a lot of the regional, Pride festivals outside the Twin Cities. So a lot of stuff like that. So we've usually got at least one book table per month, often more than that. So.
Right on. And with things like the interviews, or maybe blog reviews, you find you spend a lot of time like reaching out to people, or do they come to you, or how does that go for you?
Often at this point, people often come to me. So we've been around so Queen of Swords has been in existence over 6 years now, which, as a local acquaintance of mine who's also a publisher, we were chatting at an event, and he fist bumped me and said, "That's like 102 in small press years."
Yeah.
And it's sadly true, because a lot of people go into, particularly, starting up publishing companies, in particular, I think very idealistically, and they've got big hopes and big dreams, and it's hard to keep things going, when sales are down, when things aren't going that well, when stuff happens, so I mean, I'm glad I spent the 2 years prepping before I launched, because I think that really made a big difference. But I know other people who did it much more spontaneously and are still doing okay and chugging along just fine. So it's a thing that worked for me. So at this point, I/we, because my authors as well, get invited to a lot of things. A couple of us have been on the radio station before, so they asked me to come back. I just did a podcast interview with Heather, as a matter of fact, last weekend. So that just went out this week. And that's part of her fiction series, because I also write a fiction series for her. I'll be moderating a panel at the online Sifwa Nebula ceremonies next week, and that was, I'm an organization member, and I just threw my hat in the ring, and they assigned me a panel. We'll be at WisCon as well, which is the big feminist science fiction convention over Memorial Day weekend. So that'll be in Madison. One area that has been really kind of interesting, and it's still too new to see if there's going to be a lot of crossover, but Jenny Goloboy, who's one of my authors, is also a literary agent, and you would know her as Kate Hartfield's agent, as a matter of fact, or you might know her as Kate Hartfield's agent, as, cool Canadian authors doing really well and doing great things right now.
Yeah.
And Jenny has a hilarious, funny science fiction novel with us called Obviously Aliens. Jenny is working on breaking into screenplays and writing screenplays. So one of the things that she's shopping around to festivals right now is a screenplay based on Obviously Aliens. And so we haven't seen whether or not that's going to have a lift on book sales or not yet. But Michael Merriam, who wrote Last Car to Annan Station, is also shopping around screenplays. And they're both getting, a lot of contest recognition and so forth. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But overall, a lot of it is just doing things, consistently and constantly. So, stuff goes up on the TikTok once a week. Stuff goes out into the various posts, at least once a week. We got a monthly newsletter. We do at least a couple of events a month. And it's not all just me. I mean, sometimes it's, sometimes we're doing things together. We usually try to do a Reddit AMA once a year, for example. Sometimes there's a critical mass of us at a convention. Like a bunch of us were at Worldcon in Chicago, which was really cool. So we got to actually hang out and spend time together, which doesn't happen all that often. So a lot of that kind of stuff,
It's nice when internet people get to be real people, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll get in the room there. At what point in your sort of 6 years thus far did you find it kind of ticked over from you having to put yourself out a lot to people coming to you and saying, hey, can we interview you for our podcast or whatever?
Well, bearing in mind that I went into this, I was already an award-winning author. I had a lot of stuff out. At one point or another, I've written everything from nonfiction to literary erotica to Sherlock Holmes sequels, so I've done a lot. So, it really started to pick up back when I was still just an author before I became a publisher. But in terms of
sense.
as a publisher, I would say it's really picked up in the last couple of years. So I'm starting to get, invited to be at events as a publisher. Jenny and I co-taught a class at Clarion last year. We both teach at the Loft Literary Center, which is the local book center here in the Twin Cities, which has a fairly prestigious footprint. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff. So, I would say that as we've gotten more visible, as we've added more people, as our books are coming up for more awards and getting higher visible reviews and so forth, that makes a difference, just because, you get shinier as that happens. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, just consistency and keep putting out good stuff, and people will hopefully pick up on you. Yeah. Now you've alluded to this somewhat, but yeah, and you mentioned the Patreon. It's no secret that the financial side of running an independent press is challenging. I'm curious, as much as you're comfortable discussing publicly, how do you tackle this, and what are your long-term plans to keep the business viable or even grow it? Well, you mentioned the Patreon. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works and what your decision was in using that as a way of getting funding?
The Patreon started out as my personal Patreon, and I generally work day jobs in IT, which, as you may be aware, is not the most stable industry in the universe. And I was trying to look to a point where I was hoping that I was going to be able to maybe not have a day job or have less of a day job. So I started it back then, and for I think like the first year or so, what I did was I experimented with different things to see what people wanted to read, wanted to see from me. And I took the proceeds and I donated it. So there was a list of donations about, where the money was going to each month. And I, just did a whole, range of different organizations. By the time I started the press, it was apparent that there was going to need to be more of a regular cash infusion, simply because you've got times where sales slow down a lot. And then you've got times where sales are really high. So, but it's difficult to kind of, spread things out. And there were things that I wanted to do. So the goal is always that each year has to be better than the year before. So that's the sales goal I set myself. And I always have a specific
Mhm.
number for that. And the Patreon helps a lot when we're having, times when things are slow, or if I want to do additional advertising, for example, if I want to do a new event, things of that nature where we need extra money and the book sales aren't going to cover it. Generally speaking, I mean, our book sales have been, except for 2020,
Which, yeah.
have been on track, increasing each year. So we're actually we're chugging along about where I hope we were going to be 2 years ago before 2020 happened.
Oh, fair enough. And to the Patreon, do you find that the additional tasks? I mean, Patreon's funny. I mean, some people get away with having like no incentives. It's just like $5, give me money, whatever. And other people get very elaborate in how many tiers they have and how many different combinations of incentives there are. And I've definitely seen some creators go, "Oh man, it's like it's another job, and I just wanted it to support the thing I want to do." And it's not like independent press. People have too few tasks to attend to in the week. So, how have you found maintaining the Patreon on top of everything else you do, and what have you done to keep it sort of manageable and exciting enough for people to want to get in on it, but not too much work to take away from the thing it's supposed to be funding?
Well, I do have tiers, but they're largely meaningless. It's just
Mhm.
there's kind of an upper tier and then there's a lower tier, and everybody gets something. The upper tier people sometimes get extra things, exclusives on things. So we do what I started out doing about 2 years ago was I actually started writing a novel in progress. And it was a project that I had backburnered for a while. And so I dug it out of the dust bunnies and blew the dust off it and said, "Here, watch me write a novel. It'll be fun." So, so I'm about little between 40 and 50,000 words in on that one. There's like a guy that gets posted, and I'm pantsing. I'm totally a pantser, so it takes me a while to do this stuff. So it's all out on the spreadsheet that I update periodically. I'm like, look, these are the characters, and it'll say things like, "This is so and so. They appear in this chapter. Are they coming back? Question mark. I have no idea."
It's
So
funny you say it takes longer. I always thought pantsing went quicker because you don't spend the ages outlining before sitting down. I'm more
I
closer to
think a
that
lot
end.
while I'm doing my pantsing, so it takes me longer because I got to feel it.
Okay.
So yeah, so I've been doing that. So our patrons get anything from first dibs on author reading videos to playlists. I put out short fiction and articles, the novel in progress when I get to it. I also, every time we get a new title, who wants one gets a copy, which is also a
Mhm.
handy way to get reviews. Just say.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
And and then around the holidays, like we have, I send out cards periodically. Like my wife, before she became ill, did a lot of, she makes handmade books and paper and journals and things of that nature, boxes. So I was sending out little Christmas tree ornaments in the shape of books. We have our own blend of tea that is made for us by a local tea company, so people get
I
tea if
saw
they want
that.
it. So that kind of stuff, just fun little bonus things, magnets.
Yeah. Okay.
But I honestly, I've had people who've been with our Patreon for years. I mean, just since the very beginning, since I first started it, and every now and then they pop up and go, "Yay!" and then they go back to whatever they were doing.
It has been my experience somewhat with crowdfunding, whether it's Patreon or Kickstarter or whatever. There are some people who they just want to support you. They don't really care about getting the tchotchkes or the whatever, or sometimes not even the book. They're just like, yeah, just make it. Just that's cool. I like that you're doing it. If I could just press a button to multiply the amount of those people, that would be amazing. And
Right.
actually, speaking of crowdfunding, you mentioned earlier that like, yeah, it's not really your jam. May I ask what it is that, at least as of this recording, I mean, you're obviously people are allowed to change their minds in the future, but as of this moment, why crowdfunding doesn't appeal to you very much as being
It's not so
integrated into your
much,
publishing
I
model.
mean, the idea, could I do it? Could I do it successfully? That part is interesting. I think that a lot of people, going into it fresh don't necessarily know how much work is involved.
Yeah.
And and there's distinctions. I mean, if you use Kickstarter versus one of the other programs, if you use Kickstarter, you got to think about those levels, and you got to think about those rewards, and you got to think about how that's going to be structured. If you use something like Indiegogo, may not fund but there's less pressure to do all the stuff. So I think what I would like to do is, and there's a story behind this. What I'd like to do ultimately is I want to do a crowdfunder for our next anthology. The problem is that every time I sit down and start to plan that anthology, something happens and it gets moved out. And I had a conversation with an author recently, and they said, so if I just write a story, will you just do the damn book? And I said, yes. So I have the feeling that's how this is going to roll.
So fair enough. Yeah, and if I may ask again, I'll cut this if you're not comfortable. Speaking of the financial side, has Queen of Swords become your part-time or full-time job, or is it still?
It's definitely not my full-time job.
Okay.
Yeah, for context, my spouse has dementia. And so I am, and I live in the United States, and I'm sure you've heard horror stories about our healthcare system, and our safety nets are not great. So there have been several points where it looked like I was going to be able to switch into writing, teaching, publishing, and really focus on that. And then usually something happens, and this is the current something has happened. So I am still working a day job in IT. And like I said, I mean, we do a little better each year. We add wacky stuff, liability insurance, our own set of tables and chairs and a tent dedicated just to doing events. So we don't have to borrow things anymore, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's not at a point where I feel comfortable just saying, okay, I can just do this now. We'll see how this year goes. We've had some big changes going forward, which have been really cool. One of which is Jenny, who is, as I mentioned, is a literary agent, had been pushing me to try for audiobook sales. And I didn't think that we had the sales figures for it. But finally, after months of her diligently shoving in a very kind way, very understanding, but very persistent. I went and talked to Tantor Media, and I pitched some of our books to them, and they ended up buying the audio rights for the first 2 werewolf books. They've also optioned the third, so I need to actually finish the third book. So what we're doing this year is we're doing the new editions of Melissa and Amy's Lines and Matthew novels, which is Death by Silver and A Death at the Dionysus Club. And like a lot of that stuff is already like put together. So the first book's out, second book is already getting put together. We're doing a really cool novella release this summer by an author named Dee Holloway. It's called Little Nothing, and it's set in Florida at the start of the Civil War. And it's about this young lesbian couple, one of whom does thread magic.
Okay.
So she makes protective spells and things with knotwork and embroidery. And her lover, who trains essentially water horses. And the plot hinges on the Confederacy trying to get control of the water horses to use them to attack the Union, and our heroine's working to stop them. And it's beautifully written. There's all kinds of cool stuff going on in it. And we're really close to having that one ready to head out the door in ARC form and all of that good stuff. After which I'm going to spend, several months writing a new werewolf novel, because it'll take me several months to write a new werewolf novel.
Well, that actually gets me to something else I really want to talk with you about. I knew going in, launching my magazine, that would be time not spent on my own writing. And I just thought, I really want to make the thing, whatever, I'll figure it out, I'll accept it. Also, with my reading, I've definitely lowered my Goodreads goal for the year compared to previous years.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So, yeah, like how many hours a week roughly do you find you put into Queen of Swords, and how do you eke out time for your own writing?
It's hard. And granted, if I didn't also have to work full time and do caregiving, it would be easier. But factoring in teaching time, doing radio shows, doing book tables, doing all of that stuff, plus the editing, the writing, the following up on things, it's a lot. I estimate that probably with all of it, I'm spending about 70, 80 hours a week. And then my own writing is kind of like we get little drips and drabs of things. And it was a lot easier before I had to add caregiving to the mix. That's definitely pushed things in a way that's been really challenging. I mean, like last year we were able to have interns, and we had, so we actually had interns in the university who did like amazing work for us. It was so cool, and this year people have been talking to me about it, and I'm like, I just don't have the bandwidth right now. Please stay on the radar. Please keep talking to me. but it's probably not going to happen this year. Yeah, so that's basically why I'm saying, we're going to be on hold for submissions. We're going to be on hold for new stuff while I write this next book, because the Werewolf series is our best-selling series. So it would be silly to ignore this opportunity. So I'm going to go pay attention to that opportunity. So what will
And is
probably...
writing...
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, is writing that to be a work in progress on your Patreon? I just always, my instinct is always to sort of like knit things together as much as possible, so the time and energy gives you the biggest reward, right? Yeah. And I just wonder if that's how you're thinking. Are you gonna write that third werewolf novel live on Patreon, so to speak, or will it be
no private? That's another novel. The novel I'm doing on the Patreon was one that I am emotionally comfortable letting people watch me try to figure out a draft and where stuff's going and what I'm doing with it. Okay. The werewolf novels are books of the heart, and so no, those are two separate projects. So I've got it started. It's underway. I've chugged my way through a few hundred words a week, and that will eventually pick up speed. So that's going to be kind of the focus for us. And then for next year, it's probably going to be some books by authors who are already writing for us, because they know what's going on. And it's a little easier for me to write stuff if I've got some things that are plug and play. They're ready to go. We're not waiting for them to come in through the door and then go through 5 rounds of editing and all of that stuff. We'll get back to that. That's the plan. It's just at the moment, I got to write another book.
Do you find for sneaking writing time, are you one of those people who can write on their phone, or do you have like a little notepad you pull out of your butt pocket when you got 10 seconds, or is it a little more like, okay, yeah, it has to be at a laptop? Like, how do you find that?
I can do some writing on my phone. Usually if I'm going to write on my phone, it's going to be an article or a short story. And I can do that. One of the things that's really fallen by the wayside for me in the last, 2 years has been short fiction writing, which on the one hand kind of makes me sad. On the other hand, the landscape has changed so much for short fiction in the last few years. It would take me time to get caught up with it again.
Like in terms of what's popular, or
what's popular, style, what markets are out there, who's doing what all of that looks like. So last year I had a couple of short stories published, one queer Weird West story, one of my Sherlockiana stories, something else that I'd have to look up, and an essay. But before I started publishing, that would have been a devastating year for my ego, because I was putting out so much more than that. Right. Now I'm kind of like, yay, I actually got some stuff out the door.
Well, yeah, and I guess sometimes you just have to stop and be like, I know even already. There are days I've been having a much lower scope than what you're wrestling with, where I think, oh, I didn't get anything done, and it's like, actually, if you look at the hours of the day, like lots of things were done. I just didn't write a new short story. And so, do you find you have moments you have to remind yourself, like, no, you're doing lots of stuff, you're doing great. It's just not some of the other stuff.
That was more of a thing last year, I think, for me. This year I'm like, I've got stuff to focus on. It's like, all right, I got the audiobook. It's no longer, I'm not doing anything. I'm writing a novel slowly. In fact, I'm writing 2 novels, 2 separate novels. So I feel better about that.
Good. And talking about feeling better and just how writers feel in general, do you find part of the joy of running a publishing house is in your press is being able to treat your creators the way you would like to be treated yourself as a writer? Do you find that? I try.
I try to be really straightforward with people. I support their other projects. So if they've got, books or podcasts or, something out with other publishers, something new, I'm really plugging the screenplays, because I think that's really great. So I try to keep things, because I figure that they do well, we do well.
Yeah.
And there's generally a direct correlation. People pay more attention to the press because people are paying attention to our authors. We get some really, cool things that come along from time to time. But like right at the moment, just the projects that our authors are engaged in. Alex Axe is working on a team that's working on a game for Marvel.
Oh, cool.
So that's really cool. I've already talked a little bit about Michael and Jenny. Heather's usually got something, amazing going on with the podcasting and her historical research, which has been really, really phenomenal. So we have a lot of that kind of stuff going on. We're working with a really talented bunch of folks, and we're very lucky to be able to do that. My philosophy is go get them, go do cool things. And if that means we have to wait another year for your next collection, your next novel, your sequel to something, well, something else will come along to fill that gap, and we'll move forward from there.
Fair enough. So I feel like we could fill, a whole hour just on this next question. So I'll say, the first couple of things that come to mind, maybe we'll focus on. What advice might you give anybody who is considering starting their own independent press? What would be sort of some of the big headlines on that?
Aim to be in it for the long game if you're going to do it, because it's a lot of work, and you've got to find whatever that level of joy is for you in that process. So a lot of the small presses that I have seen fold in just the time that I've been publishing, people go into it either with very high expectations of how it's going to work, particularly when it comes to sales and the point at which they're going to, magically break even and be able to cut free of the day job. I mean, people do it. It does happen, but it's usually not, your first 2 or 3 years. You're going to be at it longer than that to see that kind of, rise out of it. I think also that I was talking to a friend who's a small business owner of a different kind of small business, and we were talking about a local pie baking enterprise that had regrettably closed up shop, which was really unfortunate because their pies were amazing. But one of the things that would happen was that they would close pretty regularly to, quote, rediscover joy, unquote. Yeah, exactly. And
what? Sorry, listener, I just pulled a face. Anyway, yeah, what?
yes. And my friend and I were talking about that, and she's like, no, man, you either get the joy, you find what joy there is in the day to day. And if that is not the thing that speaks to you, then you are not cut out to do this, because this is hard. I mean, for me, like just a recent scrap of joy. I hadn't seen this when it came out. I don't know how I missed it, because I usually pay attention to the stuff. But Cora Buellert gave a shout out to Michael Merriam's Last Car to Annan Station as one of her favorite novels from last year. And so I was able to pass that along, and Michael's just like, wow, so excited.
Well, it's funny you should mention Cora is one of the people who made me aware of you and what you're doing.
Cora is awesome. Really like Cora. I hope I get to meet her in person someday.
So be in it for the long haul. Find that joy where you can. I don't know, just rule of threes. Is there anything else you'd like to give as advice to people?
Networking is your friend.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, networking is such a huge boon, especially if you are undercapitalized and overscheduled, as most of us are, to be able to boost other presses. We do book bundles, for example, next month in June. We do an annual story bundle, and it'll be the Pride Month story bundle that we do each year that Melissa and I coordinate. And we got books from, I think, 13 different presses, all queer focused presses. And we, among other things, the book bundle is we can designate a charity for part of the proceeds through Story Bundle. And so we raise money for Rainbow Railroad, which is an international nonprofit that assists LGBTQ people to leave places where they are in mortal danger. Yeah. I'm tempted to say like Florida, but we'll put that aside for the moment. Huh. They helped people get out of Chechnya. They've done just amazing work. And so every year they're our designated charity, and we go make some money for them, as well as getting the word out about some really great books. And it was kind of interesting. We've been doing this for a few years now, and usually, we get a pretty positive response from publishers. And this year it was just amazing, that we were getting publishers coming back going, "Could you take 3 of my books?" Like, sure. So I think we filled up within 2 weeks, and usually it takes us a little bit longer than that. But it's this great chance to work together to promote, in a lot of cases, new and unusual voices, books that people might not be running across. So we do a lot of stuff like that. Last year, Dave Ring from Neon Hemlock, which is just a great press, and Dave does amazing work. Dave coordinated with the Library of Congress and got a group of us together, and we did a panel for the staff at the Library of Congress, and it was several different small press publishers, including Queen of Swords Press. So just stuff like that where you get to, to work with other presses, and it takes so little to, give a shout out to somebody's crowdfunder, plug their new title, do reviews if you have time, but certainly at least lend your social media footprint to picking everybody up and helping them get the word out too.
I couldn't agree more with that. Listen, I think we'll have to have you back on at some point or whatever, because I definitely feel like I could talk for another hour without breaking a sweat with you. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
So for now, though, you have been extremely good at what you do in the sense. So I usually like to wrap up by asking, like, so what do you got coming out? But you have covered the hell out of that. So
that's me.
No, good. Hey, you're good at your job. What can I say? So, perhaps I'll put a link in the show notes and stuff like that. But it's always good to hear it as well. If people want to find Queen of Swords online, where should they go?
QueenofSwordsPress.com is our main website. We do have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for out there. We also have a footprint on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're QOS Press on Instagram and TikTok. We do have a Discord, but we usually just use it for events. So our main platforms these days are Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We have a YouTube channel with videos of our authors reading, as well as I do workshops about small presses and starting small presses and fun stuff like that. And I also build playlists of panels where, events that our authors are appearing at and so forth. So yeah, those are probably like our main ones at the moment. And if anybody has any great ideas about replacing Twitter, I'm all over it.
Yeah, same here. All right. Well, thanks so much, Catherine. Like I said,
I was good at Twitter.
I know, right? Like, especially after like working so hard to build an audience and for however long anybody's been at it, and then it's like, oh well, sorry, some really cool guy just bought it, and anyway, grumble. All right. Well, on that fine note, lots of positive stuff in this interview as well. Again, thank you so much for your time, Catherine, and we'll have to have you back at some point in the future.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
So I'm Writing a Novel features original intro and outro music by Gloria Guns and is hosted by yours truly, Oliver Brackenbury. If you'd like to get in touch, please email us at soimwritinganovel@gmail.com. You can also holler at the show on Twitter. Look for @so_writing. That's @so_writing. Please consider sharing the show with anybody who might like it or checking out any of the other ways you can support the show by heading to soimwritinganovel.com/support the show, which has things like links to our Patreon, Coffee, and PayPal. Thanks for hanging out with me and Catherine, and I'll see you soon.